Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. I'm experimenting today with music and chess. I'll be listening to some of my favorite tracks. The list I have queued up is from hip hop, and if I'm not sure if the mic will pick up their music or their sound or not. So we'll just move along from there. Okay. I think I'm going to be reviewing this game and possibly the game before it as well. And I'm going to do so on Lichess. So long as the so long as chess.com's working on getting their game review back up or updated. It is. Just check in on the game review. So they're working on that, and with that game, I'm gonna actually also check the game before it. Oh, no. This was one ending, and the most recent game I played against the same opponent doesn't show up in my game history. So if anybody, maybe that'll help realizing that. This is there. We just reviewed that. This one, we also want to review. Okay. I'm pretty sure I played 2 games against this opponent. Right. Well, we'll leave that as it is for now. And import game. Check this other game. This might be the same game. Did I just paste the same game? I did. Right. Well, sorry about that. Okay. We have the 2 games I've played today. I believe I've played 2 games against this opponent, MJ, and I believe those are the only games I've played today. Let me check here. Yeah, this one was from yesterday. Wait, but this one was also from yesterday, and also a really great game. So let's open that one up too. And I know how chess.com chess.com's review feels about it, or rated it, or whatever you want to call that. Let's get let's get an indication from Lichess.org on the same game. I'll check the window here. It looks more or less this is how I'd want to present the game, given what's there in terms of Lichess's offerings and these windows around here, the board and the move list and so on. Let's review. Might want to play this out against computer first. Well, we know that this game is done, so in terms of it making a teaching point, we'll play the game out as it occurred. And I had white pieces received for 83% accuracy. It's not all that great, but let's see what happened in this game a bit. Philidor defense, known as the Philidor d6 here is the Philidor defense. I'm usually playing to break things open, wide open right away. Capturing with my knight, though, if you know the line, capturing with the queen is also possible. Yeah, so my opponent played a passive move like bishop e7, and I'm looking to develop my pawn to c4 in front of the knight that will usually go to c3. And with those things established, my opponent is hip to this, he wants to kick this knight short of c5 and moves like it that aim at undermining white's control of the d4 knight. Short of that, we'd have our knight at c3. We'd just have this fantastic center to aid with mobility and put black's pieces in a cramped position. Pawn to c5, knight f5, and the bishop's going to swap off with that knight. And the issue here is kind of a bonus for white in capturing the bishop. This, I don't know how it is, somehow the f5 square turns out to be very difficult for black to defend. This lone pawn in some variations of the Maroczy bind, and a number of other variations that get a lone pawn on f5 is difficult for black to attack. The natural knight move to f6 doesn't do it, and then it's a while before that can become a threat. A knight move like knight to h6 is just weird with the knight on h6, and most often white can capture by way of bishop takes h6, doubling black's pawns, destroying black's kingside castle, so that's not always on anyway. Here, here black has, did I say white? Here black has no light squared bishop, as it's just been traded, that the bishop, the pawn has just captured there. So that's not on. The bishop's a dark squared bishop, so that's not on. The queen is a real, the queen's a real threat, but she can't get to f6 to attack, but she just has to go to d7, and she'd be attacking a pawn. Does she want to take that kind of timeout in the opening for this f5 pawn? And on d7, couldn't she, in some variations of the pawn here is blocking it, bishop to b5 would be devastating, in certain cases. The knight on b8 is like a hop, skip, and a jump, and he's still not there. It's just, this hop would be better, and then we'd sort of skip to here and be at least attacking after two moves. The rooks, forget about it. So this f5 knight, f5 bishop, it's kind of like that. It's almost as strong as that. The f5 pawn is difficult to assail. Now, all seriousness, or all joking aside, I would kind of recommend just getting rid of the guy with g6. What do you do? I mean, it's going to mess up. Black's going to mess up his castling ability, or at least the pawn shield around his king. It's in this position. This is actually, and let me be clear that this position in particular highlights the difficulty of capturing a white pawn on f5 for black to capture. This highlights that really, really well. Some positions you get to aren't quite this like strikingly in that direction. Okay, so we've talked about that. Knight to f6, bishop e2. Pretty much the right place for this bishop. It's going to help to control the knight while also forming a battery with the queen. And The other alternative would be d3, where it cuts out some of the queen's influence over the center. So I didn't go for that. d3 is not so bad overall. With the bishop here, we're keeping an eye on our f5 pawn, but remember, we're also using the unassailability of the pawn at f5 as our strength. So why not use it so much so that we can put the bishop on a better square? Kingside castles, and I played bishop to f3. Look, because this move is fine anyway, but also has this one-off shot against the b7 pawn. You know, my opponent plays something without taking that into account. Well, that wouldn't go. My opponent plays something without taking into account, and then the bishop's on b7. There's a pawn gone, and there's going to be at least the exchange on a8 thereafter. And there's no way for the rook to polypoo around that. I finally get my kingside castle, and is it not? I think it's move 11, something like that. Let's pull up the move list, George. White castle's on move 10. Knight c6 is out there. I decided to swap and creating a nice pawn chain on the queen's side. I don't have to worry about this very weak diagonal, because black can't take advantage of it at the exact moment. Right? Queen's not moving like knights. Black can't take advantage of this weak diagonal on the exact moment, and white can cover up on the very next move, and should. You don't want to wait too long, because if you have to cover up after the threat's there, then your bishop's gone, right? And sometimes the rook will also be attacked thereafter. You gotta cover up beforehand, because that bishop won't be protected on b2. I saw this move, queen to e4. This is a blunder. And we attack the high value piece on way to capturing the relatively less valued piece behind it, but it's still a full piece. So queen captures that wily pawn that I told you was going to be our asset in this game. She's deflected away by capturing the pawn, sort of, because if the pawn wasn't there, she'd just be on open space. But either way, rook takes e7. White is ahead by 2 points of material, and will pretty much go on to trade material. My opponent thought it wise to swap queens to double my pawns. Usually, my opponent's down 2 points of material. Usually, the advice would be maybe hang on to your queen, because if nothing else, she makes a lot of ruckus. And for instance, here, queen h5 threatens checkmate, or does it? Maybe not quite, but it's getting there. It's closer to it than other situations. So usually we're going to keep our queens on the board when we have fewer points of material, when our opponent has a material advantage. But my opponent swapped queens, and that's also fine to create this. It's not all that bad a move, but I would recommend against it. Anyway, look, now white has these doubled pawns, and that can become a weakness. And here white has to take time out to protect the stranger of these two double pawns, and we see there's still some life left in this board. White finally completes his development. Now I was deciding between bishop to f4 or pawn to f4. I don't think perhaps they're both okay. I want to, let's get this in here. And I'm working with Stockfish here. So Stockfish 17 likes bishop e3. and knight to d5. The arrow points out that bishop to f4 is also fine. I want a move like pawn to f4. How does Stockfish feel about that? What does Stockfish think about pawn to f4? I think it's okay. 4.4 against what I played. Bishop f4 was seen as a bad move though, so how about knight d5 seems to be a crowd favorite here, a home crowd favorite. Okay, so knight d5 is 4.5 against 4.4. To answer my question, that out of the moves I wasn't considering knight d5. I see it's an excellent move, but I didn't happen to consider that at this point in the time. But rather than bishop to f4, pawn to f4 seems to be indicated most. I wanted to get my development done. I thought if I captured the knight on e5, then pawn takes, and then another pawn is gone away from black and in my coffers. I didn't want this rook to be out of the game for too long. So anyway, it's a move. Bishop f4 wasn't the greatest move. I think mostly because knight to g6 is going to fork my rook and my bishop. I think I can just about get away with it with rook to e4. And then if pawn to d5, c takes d5, or even knight takes d5, getting an extra point of protection on the bishop at f4 in case this rook gets harassed back to one of these ranks back here. All right, so king to f8, rook c7. Then my opponent plays this strong move, knight d3, but I have a strong counter move, knight to d5. He can capture my bishop, and remember, the material trades of equal value are better for white. So as he captures my bishop, I capture back, and this is just straight up, look, 4 rooks, but then I have a knight against black's extra pawn. Get behind the pawn and let the knight continue to defend, the only more natural way for black to defend this backward pawn on d6. Use that to pull the rook over. Did black maybe have rook to d8 here? If rook to d8, then probably just a swap of rooks on d8. And it's a game, but white's still got a strong advantage. You can cut off the king with rook e1, and then plant a very valuable knight on d5. So really not such a big deal that my opponent brought his a rook over. Capturing the pawn. And soon enough, white's just going to be ahead by so much material, mostly in pawns. This is a good point here. My opponent first stacks the e-file, which is fine. It's good to get a nice, powerful doubling of rooks on the e-file. Then he's going to spread to the rook to the b-file. It's a good place for that rook to be. It can't be assailed anytime by my knight, and yeah, so that's fine as well. in preparation for rook to e2, to then have this doubling of rooks on the second file. He'll be eating through pawns. He'll be levying. He they will be levying attacks against my king in the process. I absolutely could not allow this as white, so I played knight to e3, and it cuts off this rook's access to the second rank. It's just a block. Maybe you call it a block or a blockade, however it's called. I was really glad to find that move. I said, hey, I'm making progress as a chess player here. This is not the kind of move I would have found 4 years ago. Now that being said, this is like this is like the worst blunder possible on the board. What do we got as a blunder against that? Who's 93? What are you offering against? Okay, here's that. Yes, it's a full piece as a blunder. Darn it, Joy. The idea was still good to block the doubling on the second file, but it's a full piece as a blunder as rook takes e3. Doesn't allow for white to recapture. The only piece that could otherwise recapture would be the f2 pawn. He can't because he's pinned to my very own king. This was a full piece. This is a blunder in terms of a full piece. I wonder if did I have the game pretty much in control? I did. I had a good amount of control. Let's play this. I'm not going to take their suggestion because that's a little bit much. White can get away with. Rook takes d6. Uh, Okay. Let's close this one. This is from yesterday, right? It's a really good game I played in between broadcasts. After my last broadcast yesterday, I played this after my last broadcast yesterday, in between yesterday's last broadcast and today's broadcast being this current one. This is where we just played through. I had black this name. All right. Remember when I switched back to this server, the board doesn't quite fit. They. I have to remember to change it. I'm going to change it when I'm switching between chess.com and leechess.org. Just to change the layout on my broadcast a bit. All right. So I'm gonna review one of my best games from when it took place yesterday. I think it's kind of like one of my best games of not just yesterday, but so far this year or something. We're only a week into the year, George. So it's one of my best games of January. And here I had the black pieces. Played to try to reclaim my pawn on c5. Straightforward development. I'm not too worried about my bishop being blocked in these positions. A lot of times black's light squared bishop on a queen's pawn opening has difficulty developing. That's its own thing. It's one of the main. It's actually one of the main reasons why white plays d4 and then c4 is that in the queen's gambit, whether it become queen's gambit declined or the semi-Slav or the Slav, it's the same thing. The black's light squared bishop is notoriously boxed in. And that becomes a strategic question. How is black going to make this bishop have an impact on the game. Sorry, that was louder than I had expected. So sorry about that. All right. Um, that didn't make sense, did it? Keeping everybody on the same page. Okay. F6. And so pawn to F6. I don't know. I was looking at variations where I would push White's dark squared bishop back with F6 and then E6. I might have had a better time of it though, of instead of F6 at all, playing H5. That falls apart too. Okay, so maybe F6 was fine. F6 was fine. And H5 here is just purely going for a piece trap against White's dark squared bishop. I'm gonna trap that piece. More often, if I do get G5 in, then it's gonna be either bishop. No, wouldn't be bishop takes or knight takes on G5 because the pawn captures buttressed, supported, and backed up by Black's queen. Then he loses two minor pieces for a pawn, and White cannot sustain that. White cannot allow that. We're going to push this bishop back anyway. It allows us to get this sort of kind of a goofy say it. This one-off attempt against the knight and the pawn being at h3 means White's got to react to this somehow. He can't let me destroy his pawn shield on h3, and he can't let me, gather a full piece in exchange for a pawn on f3. So, decision made. H takes g4, and we're pushing the knight away. So I almost had this calculated out. For this, we will need torch. Torch 4 has the answers for this on it. I almost had this calculated out. Black's doing okay, more than a pawn on the progress bar. The knight goes to d4, it's a good move. And queen d6 is hanging his whole queen out there. But I'm thinking, what can White do? So let's say, take the bait. Bishop takes d6, rook takes h1 check, king d2, rook takes d1, that's the queen, check, king takes queen, and then bishop takes bishop on d6. Black is up, bishop, even if this pawn will fall soon. There's one very serious issue with that. Go through it as it was played in the game. Right here, king to d2 is not a good move for White. Better, my opponent could block the check on f1, and now nana poo poo, my opponent might say. Not really, you wouldn't say that to a live opponent. But White's thinking, I got the only queen on the chessboard, and I would then capture on d6, but I think White would end up with a strong material advantage anyway. But it was the miss that won the game. I didn't catch on to bishop f1 as a good block of the check, but so my opponent didn't either, or didn't play it anyway, and I got myself a strong material lead after an exchange of knights. I believe my opponent captures on g4 next. Yes, and the rest is some pretty rather tight quarters, or Black's going to calculate how to swap pieces. swap that bishop, and then when the rook captures on h5, see if you can see it. Yes, it's there, and of course, knight g3 check will pick up the rook on the next move. So that's a good win, a fun win, an interesting win that I played yesterday. I think we're finished, folks. Let me just make sure I didn't have any of these. Yeah, that's it for this session, for this broadcast. I'm very glad to see that my second game against MJ here is right here where it should be in the game history. So that's fantastic. And so that's it for that's it for this broadcasting session. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.